There's a Western sitting in most people's top 5 films of all time, and the wildest part isn't the shootout at the OK Corral. It's everything that happened before a single frame of that scene was ever captured on camera. Tombstone nearly collapsed 3 separate times before it reached a theater. Its original director got fired after just a month. Its budget blew past its ceiling. A rival star spent real effort trying to bury it before it could open. And one of its most respected actors almost turned the whole thing down. Not because of money or scheduling conflicts, but because 30 pages of the script he loved quietly disappeared without warning or apology. Sam Elliott has finally said out loud what he held back for years. And once you hear it, every scene with Virgil Earp lands in a completely different way. Kevin Jarre wrote Tombstone with the kind of scope that serious Western filmmaking rarely gets. His script didn't just follow Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. It painted an entire town filled with families, tangled relationships, shared histories, and moral weight spread across a large ensemble cast. Jarre also planned to direct, and when production began in Arizona in May of 1993, the cast genuinely believed in what he'd built. Sam Elliott signed on to play Virgil Earp, partly because of how Jarre had written the character, steady, purposeful, and morally grounded in a way that set him apart from the louder personalities surrounding him. Production designer Catherine Hardwicke constructed more than 60 buildings across a 12-acre set, working from old photographs and period street maps to recreate the real Tombstone with enough accuracy that actors later described walking onto set as stepping directly into the 1880s. Kurt Russell practiced with single-action revolvers until drawing and reloading felt like muscle memory. Val Kilmer worked on Doc Holliday's southern drawl and the particular physical fragility that tuberculosis brings. The entire cast treated this production as something genuinely worth doing right, which made what came next hit that much harder. The problem surfaced by day 3. Jarre's directing style leaned heavily on wide, sweeping master shots, the visual language of classic Western cinema, but the pacing those choices produced didn't match the modern energy the story required. Cinematographer William Fraker brought his considerable experience and offered course corrections more than once, but Jarre resisted outside input on almost every front, controlling details down to how actors wore their spurs and how individual characters moved through the frame. That level of control, combined with the steep learning curve of first-time directing, began pushing production behind schedule, while the $25 million budget started climbing. Disney had committed to a Christmas Day release and had no interest in reconsidering. After roughly a month of delays, producer Andrew Vajna made the call. Jarre was removed without any formal goodbye, and the cast absorbed that loss hard. Because Jarre hadn't just written their lines, he had built the world they were inhabiting, and losing him felt like the foundation giving way beneath everything they'd invested in the project. George P. Cosmatos arrived on almost no notice, stepping into a production already deep in motion with barely enough time to understand what had been filmed. What followed wasn't a clean directorial handoff. It was something closer to collective improvisation under a ticking clock. Kurt Russell began meeting with Cosmatos privately each night and building detailed shot lists that would guide the next morning's work. Val Kilmer stayed at Russell's place during this stretch, so they could use every available hour planning rather than traveling. Russell and producer James Jacks then cut nearly 30 pages from Jarre's screenplay, eliminating subplots, compressing ensemble storylines, and focusing the film tightly on the relationship between Wyatt and Doc. Some cast members quietly started calling the reworked version the Kurt and Val Show. Michael Biehn said the story had originally been built around a larger group, and suddenly that was no longer true. Powers Booth and Bill Paxton felt similar compression in their own roles, and Sam Elliott felt it most acutely, because Virgil's quieter, connective scenes, the ones that gave the character emotional texture and family context, absorbed the deepest cuts of anyone in the ensemble. Elliott admitted later that had he known how dramatically Virgil's role would shrink, he would likely have passed entirely. That admission carries real weight coming from someone who had returned from semi-retirement specifically because he believed in what Jarre had written. Some of the cast pushed back in the only way available to them, quietly working their favorite cut lines back into takes during filming, small acts of preservation that kept pieces of the original script alive on screen. Elliot himself held on to Virgil's presence through posture and restraint more than dialogue, giving the character authority that the remaining scenes couldn't fully carry on their own. There's a moment most viewers move past without pausing, Virgil pulling a child out of danger before the shooting starts. Brief as it is, that action captures everything Jar had written into the character. Virgil doesn't want the violence. He walks into it because someone powerless is standing directly in its path, and he's the man who can do something about that. Earlier in the film, Virgil warns his brothers against getting drawn into Tombstone's conflicts at all, and that warning, placed alongside the child rescue, makes him the story's moral center rather than its action hero, something Tombstone fans have only recently started crediting out loud. The friction on set extended well beyond creative disagreements at the top. Fraker clashed seriously with Cosmatos over visual tone and pacing throughout the shoot, and the tension grew intense enough that Fraker attempted to walk off the production 3 separate times. One argument escalated to the point where the two men rammed golf carts into each other on set out of sheer frustration. 17 crew members eventually left over Cosmatos' approach to running scenes. The budget kept climbing past its original plan, and the December deadline kept pressing closer with no room to breathe. Fraker ultimately stayed, convinced partly by producer James Jacks and partly by his own loyalty to the project. 88 days after filming began, production wrapped in late August, leaving the editing team to race through cuts, sound work, and reshoots under pressure that didn't ease until the film was physically in theaters. The box office rivalry with Kevin Costner added another layer entirely. Costner had been approached about Tombstone before deciding to develop his own Wyatt Earp project, one he controlled completely, centered on Earp as a solo historical figure rather than a member of a larger family saga. While Tombstone was still in production, Costner reportedly worked through his agency connections to discourage major distributors from picking the film up, and the effort was effective enough that only Disney's Buena Vista agreed to move forward. He also reportedly reserved most of the available Western period costumes and props in Hollywood, forcing Tombstone's crew to source wardrobe from Europe, which, as it turned out, was historically consistent with where the wealthier residents of the actual frontier town had purchased their clothing anyway. Tombstone opened on December 24, 1993, earned more than $56 million in North America alone, and crossed $76 million worldwide on a $25 million budget. Wyatt Earp arrived 6 months later, ran nearly 3 hours, cost around $63 million to produce, and earned approximately $55.9 million globally, finishing below its own production budget. Costner later acknowledged publicly that going head-to-head with Tombstone had been a mistake he genuinely regretted. What survived all of it, the firing, the rewrites, the budget fights, the golf cart collision, the costume shortage, the competing film, was a Western that audiences still rank among the finest the genre has ever produced. Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday became the kind of performance people still quote in daily conversation, with several of his sharpest lines improvised on set rather than scripted. Russell's Wyatt carried the weight of a man who knows exactly what he's walking back into, and the film makes you feel every pound of it. And Sam Elliott's Virgil, quieter than both of them, provided the moral grounding that kept the story from becoming pure spectacle. His performance didn't ask for attention. It held the emotional structure of the film together, while the louder moments unfolded around it. A 4K release with original storyboards, production features, and new interviews was scheduled for April 2025, giving audiences their clearest look yet at the gap between Jar's original vision and the film that actually made it to the screen. That gap is the real story of Tombstone, not just what it became, but everything it survived to get there, and how many people quietly refused to let it fall apart, when falling apart would have been the easier choice.